He is the bread of life, the way, the truth, and the life. He is the true vine, the light of the world, the good shepherd, and the door. He is the resurrection and the life. He is I am.
So almost 7 years ago, I stood on this stage of what was then Johnston Evangelical Free Church and did a tryout to become the new lead pastor here. And we call this in church language candidating. And if you don't know what candidating is, it's like a mix between dating someone and trying to get through the final round of American Idol. And so you're kind of like, you're asking questions like, do we like him? Does he like us? Are we gonna get married? Is he gonna get enough votes to get through to the final round? It's a kind of an interesting process. But on that day, I decided to speak from the passage we're gonna look at today, John chapter 2. And it tells the story of Jesus going to a wedding and keeping a wedding party going by turning water into wine. Now, you might think that to be kind of interesting, both why I would choose to speak on wine the first time I ever spoke here, and also why Jesus would begin his public ministry this way at a wedding celebration, keeping a party going. And yeah, we're gonna look at this again today, and I think what you're gonna see is that what Jesus did here is actually so profound and at the heart of everything he came to do on this earth. So if you have your Bible, take it and turn to John chapter 2 on your printed copy or on a device as well. Now, Jesus did this first miracle, as I said, at a wedding celebration. And weddings are one of the most exciting and joyful experiences of life. Even if you get to go and celebrate with a couple, there's just something that happens in those moments that is so thrilling and so exciting. Lots of great moments happen at a wedding. And yet I think the greatest moment that happens at every single wedding celebration is when the groom is standing approximately in this position and the wedding music changes and the doors at the back of the church open up and she walks in. And in that moment, it's like it's a holy moment. And I really believe it is a holy moment. Many of you are like me. Now, I often get to stand in this position when that is going down. And so I look at the bride that's back there, but I especially look at him. And I see what's going on with him. And you do this too. Maybe you look at her and then you look up at him. Is he grinning from ear to ear? Is he so excited? Or is he so overwhelmed with emotion that tears are in his eyes and he's looking for a tissue? Now look, I'm not an incredibly emotional person. I've told you this before, but my girls are like, Dad, you never cry. Like, you cried at that dog movie one time, but other than that, like, you just don't cry. But I have to shut my emotions off at a wedding every single time, because when those back doors open and she walks in there, I see my wife, Michelle, back there. And I think about 20 years ago when she stood in that place, and I'm overwhelmed with emotion in that moment because that joy is so full and so intense. In fact, it's so big that almost no matter what happens at a wedding, it can't overshadow the joy of that day, right? Because you've been to weddings before where crazy things have happened. Like groomsmen have been passing out. I think I was at a wedding one time where groomsmen were like successively passing out. And we're trying to see how many we could have go down. You've had the ring bearer that is yelling and screaming his head off and refuses to go down the aisle. You've had the flower girl who's supposed to be delicately putting a flower at a time down in the aisle, but she saves the whole thing till the end and then dumps the whole basket at the front of the church. Those moments actually, they sort of almost add to the moments at a wedding celebration. Here's one of the craziest things that ever happened for me at a wedding is it happened just before we moved here to Iowa. And I was as a pastor in Ohio on Miami University's campus. We had a church there, and just down the street from our church was a wedding chapel. And I was gonna be doing a wedding ceremony for a college couple at the wedding chapel, and they had asked me if they could do communion at the wedding ceremony. And I said, yeah, for sure, we can do that. And we had it planned out. It was in the ceremony. We thought, okay, this is all good to go. And so when it got to the day, I was at the wedding chapel standing outside with the groomsmen, a small wedding chapel, and it was in the summer. So we're outside getting ready. It's about 10 minutes till the ceremony when the wedding coordinator and the groom come up to me and they say, hey, do you have the communion elements? And I was like, I don't have them. I thought you guys were gonna get them. And so they looked at me and they said, well, can you get some? And I'm like, yeah, let me go into my car or let me drive to the communion store. Like, I don't just carry these things around with me. And so I'm like, yeah, okay, the church is just down the street. I go, I could run down there real quick if you're okay with that and see if I could find something. And they're like, yeah, do that. So I get in my car and I leave. Now, I'm the minister leaving the wedding moments before it's supposed to start, and nobody knows why I'm leaving except for the groom and the wedding coordinator. So like, okay, what's happening here? Well, I run down to the church. We've got a small kitchen at the church, and I'm sort of rifling through there trying to find something. I'm like, is there animal crackers or something we have around here? And I do find some communion bread. So I'm like, good to go there. I find a communion cup, but now I got to figure out what I'm going to put in the communion cup. So I start looking through the refrigerator, and there's Pepsi in there. I think maybe there was some milk. I'm like, I don't think that's gonna work. I keep looking. I'm like kind of panicking now. Like, what am I supposed to do here? Well, I look in the fridge a little closer, and I see that there's grape jelly. And so I'm like, get some water. Now, if I was Jesus, I would just do the water, and then I'd be good to go because, that's the story today, but I'm not. And so I put some water in there. I just get a glob of grape jelly, drop it in that cup, and just stir it around, I'm like, this is gonna be good to go. So I drive back to the wedding, and now we're starting to get a little bit late. I give the elements to the wedding coordinator. I'm like, get these up on stage. I tell the groom what we did, and I was like, you're gonna probably wanna give your bride a little bit of a heads up when you get up there on stage, not knowing what's gonna happen. And so when we got to that part of the wedding, I remember standing there and I stepping back so that they could do their communion at a table off to the side. And as they got over there, they just looked at me and they just gave me a wink, like, we're gonna see how this goes. And they took their communion, and about 30 seconds later, they both passed out. I'm just kidding, they didn't. they didn't. That would make even a better story. But the point is this, I think that now years after that event happened, I'm guessing you that was one of the most exciting memories that they have and that they go back to about their wedding. And the joy and the excitement, even of something crazy like that, man, the joy of the wedding, it just can't overshadow. Nothing bad can overshadow how great and how wonderful and awesome that day is. And when Jesus comes on the scene and begins his public ministry with his first sign, as John calls it, this is where we find Jesus celebrating a wedding. Check out the story. It's a pretty short story in John chapter 2, and let's just read it together. John 2 verse 1 says this. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. So this is the beginning of his ministry, and Jesus has just gathered these 12 closest followers around him, and apparently a friend of theirs, at least a friend of their family, is invited to a wedding, and Jesus is like, yeah, we're gonna go. So he's there, verse 3. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used for the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water, they knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, hey, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you saved the best wine to now. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, this is kind of odd that Jesus' first sign was to keep a wedding reception going. Not healing somebody, giving sight to somebody, but saving a couple from social embarrassment, right? I mean, it's great that he helped out. It's great that he kept this party going. But if you were launching the Messiah tour, wouldn't you do something much bigger than this? Wouldn't you raise somebody from the dead at least? Do something big like this, Jesus. But no. And what we're gonna come to find out is that there's actually so much more going on in the simple rescue of a wedding celebration that you might imagine. And to see this, we have to understand a little bit about how people in the first century defined happiness versus the way that you and I define happiness. And stick with me on this. We're gonna take a little bit of time to think about this, and I'm gonna show you how profoundly this affects an understanding of this story. In the 21st century culture that you and I live in, particularly in our American culture, there is a very specific way that you and I, it's built into us, a way that we define happiness. And primarily in this culture today, happiness is defined by personal, individual flourishing. So individual flourishing in our day produces happiness. It's about me. It's about the individual determining what happiness means to them and then hardcore pursuing that happiness the way that an individual defines happiness. And it's primarily to be found in the individual. This is why we say things like, what is your favorite? Fill in the blank. Questions like this all the time. What's your dream job? What's your favorite vacation destination? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite number? What's your favorite Jethro's location to eat at? What is your favorite? All of these kinds of things. And then we have all sorts of personality tests to help you determine who you are, how you're wired, and what would make you happy. What kind of job would be the best fit for you? What kind of spouse would be the best kind of spouse for you? What's on your dream list of a partner for your life? And how would you like to shape them and mold them? And I think if we could actually clone them and create them in our culture, we probably would just do that, right? This is why you know your Enneagram number. You have your DISC profile. You know your strength finders. You know your Myers-Briggs type. There's all sorts of these quizzes. And it's even trickled down to our children. So that your kid or your grandchild comes to you and say, hey, Mom, can I take the Disney princess test to tell me what type of Disney princess I am? Can I take the Harry Potter quiz to show what kind of Harry Potter character? What Avenger are you, right? And you want to see which Avenger you would most be like. You go on social media as well, and how many times have you seen 12 pictures that are laid out, and they say you can only choose 3. And you choose your 3 things from this list. And so you're like, I want a cabin in the woods, I want a book and a cup of coffee. Those are my 3 that fit me best, that would make me happy. Or you have a different 3. I want to have a dog, and I want to be outside running, and I want to enjoy nature, right? And you pick what makes you happy, what personally fits you. In this kind of culture, individual rights are ultimate. Individual freedoms are an absolute necessity that's just built into us. And it's ultimately about personal achievement. I define happiness, and then I set those goals for what will make me happy, and I pursue them with everything that I have. It's individual. It's about me. Now, I'm not trying to evaluate whether this is good or whether it's right or wrong. I think there's strengths and weaknesses there. I'm just trying to say this is the society that we live in. As opposed to this, in the first century, there was a very different value system and a way of thinking that people had. And the way of thinking went like this: community flourishing produces happiness. So, in the first century, at least in Israel that we're studying here with Jesus at this wedding, nobody did personality tests. Nobody knew their Enneagram number. Nobody did strength finders. Nobody even thought that much about themselves in isolation from the rest of their community. Their entire worth and value and what they saw as happiness was determined by my contribution to the community. It was about our village. It was about our town. It was about the people that are here. And as much as I can help our town be more safe, or produce goods and services for our town, or raise a family that will help our town and our community, then I am happy because my community is happy. Do you see how different that is? It's almost impossible for us to understand this. You can study it, you can look at it, we could take a lot more time talking about it, but I don't know that we could ever quite feel this. This one is where we live, and this is what we feel. It's how we make decisions. It is hardwired into us. And if you've never studied it or thought about it, you don't even realize how profoundly it shapes every single thing about this culture. And I mean Christians and non-Christians as well. And the same thing was true though in the first century culture. And that's why I say it's hard for us to understand, because all of the values were derived from the community. People didn't even see themselves as much as individuals. So they might even know globally what's going on in the world. They knew that Rome was in charge, but I don't even know how much they cared about it. They just cared about their community and contributing to their local community. If in the 21st century, the century we live in, the mantra is the individual first, and it is. In the first century, the mantra would be the community first. Individual first versus the community first. So then do this. Think about marriage in these two contexts. What would marriage be like then in these two contexts? Well, in the 21st century culture that we live in, marriage becomes about personal happiness, right? Marriage is about your individual personal happiness. This is why you make a list of the kind of person that you would want to marry and what are the values that they need to have. And you need to marry somebody that you know is going in the same trajectory in life, the same way. You marry for romance. You're romantically attracted to someone else and you're going the same direction and they're gonna support you with your dreams, and probably because it's a social contract, you're gonna have to kind of help them. But really at the end of the day, you've gotta care for you and your personal happiness. This is why divorce is so rampant in our 21st century culture, because what happens when that person doesn't contribute to your personal happiness anymore? Or you feel like you're incompatible towards your dreams and your goals? You dump them, right? You move on from them. Why would you stay with them when they're not contributing to your personal happiness? You find somebody else, or you decide, forget this marriage thing, I'm just gonna go it alone. I'm going to do it on my own. As opposed to this, in the first century, marriage was primarily about community happiness. And so people didn't get married for romance. You don't get married for romance. You typically had an arranged marriage, and you were completely fine with the arranged marriage because your happiness is not determined by romantic feelings or your individual goals and plans. Your happiness is determined by you contributing to the community. And so you will be happy when you get married, when you produce children who produce goods and services for the community, and they develop the future of that community. Does that make sense? That's what marriage is all about. And so some of us might look at this and be like, yeah, that arranged marriage thing, that's messed up, man. You could think about, we could probably make a list of how many movies have been produced in our culture on the premise that people that were supposed to have an arranged marriage and get married to somebody that they didn't love had to buck the system and buck their parents and go out on their own and find what? Marriage, yes, but not just marriage. Find true happiness because they could romantically marry somebody that they fell in love with, right? Again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's the way that it is. And in the first century, it was drastically different. Nobody was really bucking against arranged marriages in the first century like we think they must have been. Why? Because their happiness wasn't found in romantic feelings, an individual path of success that they determined for themselves. It was determined in the flourishing of the community, right? Now, most of you here, you probably be like, yeah, I'm not for arranged marriages. That just seems unattractive, and it seems like that's bad. It seems like it was oppressive to people. Now, some of you might be like, I don't know, I'll take it. At this point, like maybe, yeah, that sounds okay. But for most of us, right, it just is against everything that's the individual first kinds of things. And so in the community first context, you can understand why weddings were so vital, why they were a cornerstone of society. If you think we do weddings big now, you ain't seen nothing, man. I know people spend tens of thousands of dollars today on weddings, but typically like in our culture today, it's like a weekend celebration. And then for the guests that come, it's like, we'll give you 6 hours, We'll come to your wedding at 4:00. We'll stay there until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Like that's what we're giving to you. Yay for you. We're happy for you. We love you that you're getting married, but we'll give you half a day for it. In the first century, it was at least a week-long celebration when you got married. At least 1 week had to be given to a full-on festival, banquet celebration when the entire community would come together to celebrate. And they did this because the future of the community was tied to each couple. It was about the plans and the hopes and the dreams were all captured through that wedding celebration. They looked at this couple and they said, there's our future. There's the future of this entire village. It's resting on your shoulders. So get married, have a whole bunch of children, produce a bunch of workers who will reproduce again, and we'll keep this going. It's all about the community. And so in this setting, the bride and the groom, they were king and queen for a week. They're honored and they're celebrated. But they also had a very important responsibility to the community for this wedding celebration. That is, they had to provide a great banquet for the entire week and make sure everything went really, really well. And at this celebration, these week-long celebrations, the single most important element was wine. Wine was the most important ingredient in all of this celebration. And yes, it was the sweet taste and the social ease that wine could bring about. But more than that, the wine itself was a free-flowing symbol of joy. It pictured life and prosperity and the future, everything that the community hoped for. And so when the wine runs out partway through this wedding celebration that Jesus was at, it is disastrous. It wasn't like you running out of Diet Coke or not having enough food at your wedding celebration. Since they lived in a shame and honor culture, it was beyond shameful for this to happen. It was like an omen of bad things to come. The whole community might go down because this wedding celebration, it pictures the future. And if that's what our future is, the wine running out and the celebration and the joy stopping, we're all in trouble. This is something that the couple may never recover from. for the rest of their married lives. They might even need to leave the community and find another community to be a part of. It's a massive insult to everybody in the community. So it's a really good thing that Jesus got an invitation to this wedding. His mother, who was probably helping out with the wedding, the celebration preparations, or at least she was one of the first to know about the wine shortage, she tells Jesus, and Jesus responds to her in an interesting way, right? In verse 4 at the beginning, he says, woman, what? Husbands, I don't suggest that. Okay, let's just say that. Woman, why do you involve me in this? Now, there are some translations of the Bible that try to soften this because they're like, this is Jesus. He wouldn't have talked to his mom this way. But no, he did talk to his mom this way. He did say to her, woman, why are you involving me in this? And then he adds another statement, which is, my hour has not yet come. And this second statement is an explanation for why Jesus was a bit abrupt with his mom. Something like this is probably going on. His mother knows that there's something special in Jesus, and so she's like, Jesus, you can handle this. You can take care of this. So do a miracle. Do a sign. Reveal yourself. Start your ministry. But Jesus knows if he does that, if he reveals himself, if he does this first miracle and he starts his public ministry, it starts a long train to the cross. He knows where this ends up. He knows where he will be at the end of the day. And a miracle here, publicly displaying himself, begins the whole process. This is why he's a little bit abrupt with her. She's thinking about save this wedding celebration, and Jesus is thinking cross. See, he's fully God, but he's also fully human, and he feels the full weight. Jesus knows in order to keep the wedding celebration going, in order to keep joy in your life and in my life and for the rest of humanity, he was going to have to give up his life to make that possible. So Mary knows that Jesus is something special. She does not know that he will have to die, and that's where this is all headed. But undeterred by his reply to her, Mary turns from Jesus, looks at the servants and says, just do whatever he asks for you to do. It's like Mary knows her son, you know? Mamas know their sons sometimes. And I don't know if you know anybody like this where whenever you ask them to do something, they got to put up a bit of a fuss, but you know they're going to do it. They push back, but they're going to get it done. That's kind of going on here. It's like we don't even get any more of the conversation if there was one. Mary's like, I know Jesus, and I know it's hard for you, but like you're going to do it. He's going to do this thing. And so Jesus decides to do something about this, albeit a bit incognito. He doesn't go big time on them. He doesn't call like wine clouds out of heaven to drop champagne on everybody. He doesn't start singing, water, I'm about to turn into wine, open the eye. You know, he doesn't do anything that like publicly. He's like kind of behind the scenes. He just tells the servants to grab 6 stone jars, fill them with water, take a ladle out of there and take it to the master of ceremonies, like the master of the banquet. And this guy was like the MC. He's the host that's responsible to make a good party. Might have been the father of the bride, might have been an elder from the town that they were a part of, but this guy's responsible to make sure everything goes well. Somewhere between the filling of the water pots and the taking of that to the MC, Jesus turned that water into wine. Because when the MC tasted, he's shocked by it. He's like, wait a minute, what's going on? This is the best wine that we've had. I mean, usually, like we fill people up, we make sure they've had plenty to drink, and everything is good to go. And we're on like day 4 of the celebration, and people are even like, do I even want any more wine? And then you bring out the $3 Aldi wine. But what you're doing here is like, we already did that, and now you're bringing out the best wine anybody has ever tasted before. It's incredible. It's the best of the feast. And then abruptly, the story's over. Just done, that's it. It just ends right there. And then John adds a little of addendum. This is the first sign that Jesus did to reveal his glory, and his disciples, they believed in him. So stepping back from the story, we got to say, okay, that ended kind of abruptly. So what are we supposed to get from it? What are we supposed to get from Jesus at a wedding? And I think John is giving us at least, there's probably more, but at least 3 clear things here about Jesus at a wedding. And the first is this, don't overlook this, that Jesus cares about your reality. He went to a wedding after all, and he started his ministry at a party, which means that Jesus cares about your reality. He cares about your celebrations. He cares about your big moments, and he celebrates with you. Graduations, births, weddings, anniversaries, exciting things that happen in your life. He is the God that came down to this earth and went to weddings. I mean, shouldn't Jesus be doing something else? Like, why is the God of the universe at a simple wedding celebration in a small town in Cana? Why does he even care about those things? Because he cares about your reality. He cares about you. He cares about your school. He cares about your work, about sports, about concerts, about vacations. Jesus is a God who is connected to reality. And sometimes your reality is big and huge, like wedding celebrations. And a lot of your reality is like most of my reality, it is mundane and boring. It is just simple and ordinary. I cut my grass. I snow blow my driveway when my wife doesn't get out there and do it first. I cook meals. I brush my teeth, just like you do all of those things. And Jesus going to a wedding, coming into the normal, ordinary, and big celebrations of life means that Jesus is with you also in all of those things. When you're paying bills and pumping gas and trying to get a promotion at work or figuring out if you're gonna switch jobs or move to a new city or if you're gonna have kids or how to raise your kids or retirement, Jesus is with you in all of those realities of life. He wants to weep with you when you weep and rejoice with you when you rejoice. That should be so encouraging to you, and never forget it. You might think you have a boring life, but Jesus cares about your boring life. You might have the perception that God only cares about spiritual things. Like God's really into Sunday, you know? He's into Sunday and he's into reading the Bible and praying and doing good things to other people. And he is into those things for sure. But he's also into all of the other normal, ordinary things of your life. And Jesus at a wedding tells us that that's true. It shows us that is true. He cares about working and dating and marriage and parties and paying bills. After all, he created all of those things, right? And when he lived here on earth, Jesus worked a job for 30 years. Jesus didn't reveal himself till he was probably 30 or 35 years old. He learned a trade. He worked with his hands in a carpenter shop with his father, doing a job, building relationships, being part of a community, all of those things. So look, he gets you. He gets you. So let him in. Send him an invitation to your wedding. Let him come to your party. Let him speak into the kind of books that you read and the kind of movies that you watch and what you do with your time and what you do with your money and all of the decisions that you have to make. He cares about all of those things, and he has something to say to you about all of those things because he wants to do more than just identify with you. He wants to transform you. Jesus comes to this wedding, and the wedding is not the same when he gets done, right? He transforms water into wine, and that's what he wants to do in your life. He wants to transform you to identify with you, be with you, and then change you. Jesus has plans for you. Life-changing, life-altering plans. And we see this in our story when we come to realize who the true master of the banquet is. And that Jesus isn't just the true master of the banquet, he's actually the master of all of life. So remember this dude, this guy that's the MC? We just saw him a little bit here in the story. He's the guy that's supposed to manage the food and the drink and make sure that the party is going well. He needs to ration all of this stuff, make sure it's gonna last the entire week, everything's gonna be good. Well, apparently the guy in our story failed, or he was about to fail. And some of you maybe had this experience before with like photographers or caterers where they mess up and they really disappoint you. And you're like, I am not rehiring them. I'm gonna give them a bad review. That did not go so good. I remember one time a number of years ago, this happened up in Ankeny, actually here in Iowa, is there was a wedding reception and a bunch of the guests at the wedding reception got food poisoning and got super sick from it afterwards. And it was like, congratulations, you have the pukes. Here's our gift to you. You know, it was like a terrible thing. Maybe you've had an experience like that before. And this wedding celebration also was about to go down. The master of ceremonies, the guy that's responsible to making sure that everything goes well, he came up short. He was about to fail massively. And the funny thing is, he may not have even known it. He may have just been plodding along, like doing his job, doing his thing. But unless Jesus had stepped in, he was bound for disaster. We need to see ourselves in this story. It'd be nice to see ourselves as Jesus, but we need to see ourselves in this story as the master of this banquet. Plodding along in life, pursuing our happiness, pursuing relationships, doing our work, doing our job, doing all these things that we know that we need to do, and perhaps bound for disaster and not even know it. It's easy for us to be like this guy, to try to be successful, to try to achieve, to have relationships, to have a family, all good things, thinking that it's gonna be okay, but we could be on the brink of collapse and not even knowing it. I bet, however, that most of us get signs in our hearts and in our lives that we don't have it all together, that we don't have it all figured out, that we're not everything that we need to be. You ever feel this in your own heart? You ever feel some sense of, I don't know if I'm gonna get that figured out. I don't know if that thing is ever gonna be fixed. I don't know if I'm ever gonna get that promotion or ever get that job or ever be able to accomplish this thing that I hope to be. And why does my happiness just seem to go away from me? Why do I have it and then it's gone? It's here and then it's gone. Do you ever feel inadequate? That could be a little sign to you that maybe there's something missing. If you never feel inadequate in your life, just get married. Right? And then once you start nailing the marriage thing, then have a child. And then have another child, and then have, like us, it took 5, for us to be like, okay, this is we are not there. We don't have this all figured out. There's nothing like marriage and children and family that'll help you realize that you don't have it all together and you're not all that. But there's other things for some of you that don't have that and won't pursue that in life to help you realize that you're not everything. Sometimes the quietness, the voices that speak to you and say you're not enough or there's something missing from your life. I suggest that a lot of this problem with inadequacy and us missing out could be related a bit to our 21st century value of individual fulfillment and achievement being ultimate. Because when all of the weight of happiness is on my individual shoulders, eventually that will crush you. Because you never kill it all the time. You're never going to achieve everything you want to achieve if you have reasonable goals, right, in your life. There's going to be cracks that are going to surface. And when you're completely relying upon yourself to make yourself happy, you eventually will be crushed by that. A failed relationship could crush you. The loss of a job could crush you. A nagging sense in there that just, I'm not winning like I want to win. See, friends, your wine eventually will run out. You won't be able to ultimately produce happiness for yourself. Your joy is going to cease because we can't ultimately produce it. We can't keep the celebration going on our own. We can't manufacture that lasting joy. We need the true master of life. For that, we need Jesus. You notice this more in verse 6, where we're told about these 6 water jars that were used. And John says these were used for Jewish purification. That's what Jesus used to turn water into wine. There were all sorts of, in this culture, and from the Old Testament scriptures, even from God, these rules and these regulations to make yourself right with God. And so these stone water jars were probably used for hand washing and to wash utensils in a very specific, detailed way so that the people could be pure to be able to enjoy this wedding ceremony. This was first century COVID protocols. In other words, hand sanitizer, we're gonna take your temperature, we're gonna distance, you're gonna have to wear a mask, do all of these things. That's kind of what this is, but it was more about physical health. It was ultimately about spiritual health. And so these purification jars are a symbol of making yourself pure before God. You do this before God and you will be pure. So think about what Jesus does. He looks at those jars, which were the way that people made themselves pure, and he says, I'm gonna transform them into something else. Watch this. You're not gonna be pure before God anymore. You're not going to receive joy, and joy is not gonna come for you from you making yourself right with God and making yourself pure. I'm gonna take that symbol, that thing, and turn it into something new. I'm gonna use a miracle to produce wine from those old rituals, those old religion, those old ways, and your wine, your joy will actually be found in me. The miracle of new life, new birth, John's gonna talk about in a little bit, through what Jesus does. Not through your rituals, not through your religious ways. Jesus brings real wine, real joy with God out of the emptiness of religion and ritual. Not your efforts, not your self-achievements, not your religious duty. And when Jesus brings us this kind of joy and this kind of special relationship with God, he really brings it. 6 water jars, 20 to 30 gallons each, equals, quick math, 120 to 180 gallons of wine. That'll keep a party going for a little while. Jesus, I think we're gonna be good for another week or two here. And then not only does he bring it in quantity, but the quality of the wine, when it goes to the MC is like, we never tasted anything like this before. Why don't we have this first? This is like the best wine. Nobody brings joy in quality and quantity like Jesus brings it. And so the message of this is it's really very simple for us. Are you finding your joy in Jesus? Are you finding your ultimate joy, not in your personal achievements, not in you defining what happiness will be, and we're gonna see in a second, not even in the community itself, primarily and ultimately, but in Jesus Christ. This is what John points us to, and he summarizes at the end in verse 11 to wrap it up. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which Jesus revealed his glory and his disciples believed in him. John calls these miracles of Jesus signs very particularly and for an important purpose. You know this logically, right? Signs point to something else. Signs are not about signs. Signs exist for something else. And Jesus' amazing miracle that he does here doesn't exist for the sake of the miracle. The sign, the turning water into wine, exists so that you would believe in Jesus and see that he is the one that brings ultimate joy in all of your reality. John here says that Jesus revealed his glory and the disciples, they believed in him. And that calls us back to what John said earlier in John chapter 1 and verse 14 when he again talked about Jesus' glory and said this. He says, the Word, this is Jesus, became flesh and he made his dwelling among us because God cares about your reality. God became human because he cares about you and everything you experience. And then when he came and he, as one translation says, he moved into the neighborhood. When he moved into our neighborhood, we saw his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father. And when we see the glory of God, like when you see Jesus, you see God in all of his glory. And what does God look like? He looks like grace and truth. That's who Jesus is, full of grace and truth. When you see Jesus, you experience grace and truth. And so the third thing that John tries to show us here from this wedding celebration is that Jesus is grace and truth. The truth I think that Jesus wants to bring to us in this first sign that he does is the truth that you are not enough. That you on your own can't produce lasting joy. That your wine will run out if you're focused ultimately on yourself. So happiness is not to be found in the individual first. But get this, neither is happiness to be found in the community first. It'd be easy to idealize a past generation or other cultures that put community first, but something you have to realize about a community first culture is that a community first culture can be incredibly damning and crushing to individuals who don't contribute very well to the community. This is why it was so difficult for women who couldn't give birth in the first century. They were almost like outcasts. They must be despised by God because they're not producing offspring that will contribute to the community. That was incredibly crushing. So our happiness is not to be found ultimately in the individual first or in the community first. You know where it's found? It's found in the grace of Jesus. It's found in Jesus Christ himself, the true master of the feast. Jesus himself is enough, and he wants to bring you into lasting joy where your identity and your value is not found in yourself or primarily even in the community, but in Jesus Christ. Did you know that Jesus delights in you? If you're a follower of Jesus or you've considered this, you need to know something that as a human, you're probably going to wrestle with for the rest of your life, but you got to believe this, that Jesus likes you, that Jesus delights in you. Why does he choose to do his first miracle at a wedding? And why does he give us this imagery all throughout the Bible where he says to us, one of the main ways I want followers of me to think about themselves is that I'm standing here and you're at the back of the church with the doors opening. That's how I see you. With all of the joy, with a wide smile or a tear in his eye, he looks at you the way a groom looks at his bride on his wedding day. With all of that affection, the God of the universe stands as a groom with you as his bride, and he delights in you. He delights in you. That's what we get from Jesus at a wedding. He's given us a picture. He's showing us who he is and the way that he sees you. So believe in him and let him be the one to bring you joy, to define what happiness is for you, what happiness should and can look like. Because this God who stands here and sees you as his bride was willing to go to the cross to make that happen, to bring you into his family and to make you his own, to make you purified. It's not through stone water jars and it's not through sanitizing your hands. I mean, he's even willing to be a little sassy with his mom because he knows that the way he's gonna bring you joy is by going to the cross and dying for you. But he delights in you that much. He loves you that much. And look, when you can find your ultimate hope and identity and value in Jesus and his grace, it changes everything. It changes everything. It puts the individual first thing in the right context, that there's pieces of that are good and that we need. And it puts the community in its right context. We need people. We need relationships, but it can't ever be ultimate. And so I invite you to come today and believe. Maybe for some of you, for the very first time, to believe and to give your life to Jesus and let him show you what true joy is. And that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're gonna be like, oh good, I'm happy, and now I will be happy for every single moment of my life after this. It doesn't exactly work like this. You gotta grow, you gotta learn. We're still gonna struggle, but you could take the next step into letting Jesus define that happiness and joy for you. And for those of you that have trusted in him, would you come back to him again and to realize that he cares about your reality, every part of it, that he's the true master of your life. He wants to bring you real, true joy, because he is grace and truth, always grace and truth to you. Would you pray with me?